Hello. Sorry that I can't be with you in there in person. My name's Dr. Aaron Thierry. I'm a researcher at the University of Cardiff. My area of specialty is actually looking at how scientists are getting involved in the climate movement. And I'm actually going to be making the case today in this talk for why I think more scientists should consider doing so. So the first thing I just want to remind us all, and so that we're all just thinking about where we're at, is this statement by Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, at the launch of the last IPCC report, in which he says, "We are at code red for humanity." Scientists have been increasingly raising the alarm and putting out warning after warning. This is a recent example of the world scientists warning of a climate emergency, in which they state clearly and unequivocally that the planet Earth is facing a climate emergency. But scientists have been making fairly similar statements for a long time. There was actually a scientist warning letter written back in 1992, and we keep saying the same things over and over again with more and more urgency, but nothing seems to actually be changing. In fact, if you were to look at this graph, which is showing you the CO2 parts per million in the atmosphere, and the increasing temperatures that goes along with that, you could almost be forgiven for thinking that, these meetings and these reports that have been put out haven't had any effect at all. So the question is, why is that? And this review paper by Isaac Stoddard et al., I think, really helps us think through this. They bring together a very interdisciplinary team to look at it with lots of different lenses. And what they kind of conclude is that there's a common thread that emerges across all the reviewed literature, which is the central role of power. And they say that's manifest in many forms, from dogmatic political economic hegemony and influential vested interests to narrow-minded techno-economic mindsets and ideologies of control. By vested interest, what they're really talking about is the fossil fuel industry. And here's just kind of the top 20 oil and gas companies in terms of who have been most responsible for fossil fuel emissions, with Saudi Aramco coming in at number 1, Chevron at number 2, Gazprom 3, ExxonMobil 4, and so on. So in the paper, they say that political action to mitigate climate change has also been slowed at the regional, national, and international level through direct lobbying by fossil fuel companies and through the funding of political actors. So they really identify that as a key barrier. And it's something that the IPCC also draw attention to in their report. Here they are saying that the interaction between politics, economics, and power relationships is central to explaining why broad commitments do not always translate to urgent action. They go on to say that accelerating climate mitigation includes simultaneously weakening high carbon systems and encouraging low carbon systems, and also overcoming resistance to policies, e.g. from incumbents in high carbon emitting industries. Well, we know that if we look at the fossil fuel industry's business plans, they're continuing to increase fossil fuels, right? So despite an array of new net zero pledges released in the past 2 years, the climate promises of major US and European oil and gas companies still failed to meet the bare minimum for alignment with the Paris Agreement, according to Oil Change International. The UN United Nations Environment Programme have published similar in their production gap report, showing that by 2030, we will be producing more than twice the amount of fossil fuels as is compatible with being on a pathway to 1.5 degrees. And this gap is going to continue throughout the coming decades. So the science is really clear on this now, that the overwhelming majority of fossil fuels have to stay in the ground unburnt if we're to stay within our Paris climate targets. This is Fatih Birol, the executive director of the International Energy Agency, making that point, saying that if governments are serious about climate crisis, there can be no new investments in oil, gas, and coal from now. But what are governments doing? They're actually increasing funding and exploration for new fossil fuels, right? So the US national gas production has just set a new record high. Britain is committing to hundreds of new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea. Saudi Aramco is planning to expand gas output by 60%. Norway is planning to offer record numbers of Arctic oil and gas exploration blocks, and so on and so on. If we look at the world's largest banks, they're dumping trillions of dollars into fossil fuels since the Paris Accord. In fact, this report published last year by Banking on Climate Chaos, it says, warning that new investments now risk locking in decades of climate warming emissions or becoming stranded assets. Any bank supporting any company that is expanding fossil fuels is driving climate chaos. And that's pretty much all banks, right? In fact, many of the banks have recently been increasing the amount that they've been investing in fossil fuel companies, not decreasing it. So what do we do about this? Well, I think the IPCC has some guidance there too. They're warning that they argue that we need to have collective action as part of social or lifestyle movements to underpin system change. So what does that look like? Um, Isaac Stoddard and others write similarly in the conclusion of their paper. They say that the central question that we really have to grapple with now is how can existing and new social movements mobilize popular power and social imaginaries in a way that effectively challenges the status quo and helps drive structural change at the scale and pace required. So we're in emergency times, and ultimately that then calls for emergency measures. And what we're arguing, and I've been involved with arguing, is the case for why scientists now need to step into civil resistance, and that means taking civil disobedience as part of our efforts to raise the alarm and push for climate action. This is from a declaration that we put out as scientists, signed by many scientists, saying that as scientists, we have an obligation that extends beyond merely describing and understanding the natural world to taking an active part in helping to protect it. We note that the scientific community has already tried all conventional methods to draw attention to the crisis. So why scientists in particular? Well, we argue that one, they're well respected, and therefore people will listen to us, and that we can therefore show leadership and take people with us. And taking part in civil disobedience is a highly communicative act. It shows how much we care about our findings, what they mean to us, and the fact that we stand by them. Some people are concerned and ask, is it ethical? Well, I think it's very clear that it is. So this is action that we're taking to prevent great harm. It's an action that we're only taking as a last resort, having tried for decades other ways of pushing for change on this issue, which has been ignored time and time again. And ultimately, we are still carrying out these actions within fidelity of law. We are taking responsibility for our actions. Others ask, is it legitimate for scientists to carry out these actions in our role as scientists? Well, to that, I ask, are scientific norms serving us now? Naomi Oreskes, the historian of science, points out that our views of the appropriate role of science and scientists are always historically contingent, and that during the Cold War, many scientists and distinguished physicists, including Bethe and Bohr and Einstein and others, all spoke out against the risk of nuclear proliferation. And she says that they were able to do so in part because of their expertise as physicists gave them a particularly acute appreciation of what an uncontrolled arms race would lead to. So by scientists speaking out on their areas of expertise, it can really lead to a wider understanding of what this needs to happen. So I think we also need to really bear in mind that no dialogue between science and society is ever neutral. In fact, we always have to pick a side. So especially on this issue when the stakes are so high, we're either for the continued expansion of fossil fuels and the destruction that we're headed to, or we're going to resist that. We're going to fight back against it. And likewise, the public expects scientists to act for the public good. There have been several papers that have shown this now. And there's a recent study that showed that there's no loss of credibility to scientists who take part in these actions. In fact, this is where we kind of summarize these arguments in a recent paper published in Nature Climate Change. It's called Civil Disobedience by Scientists Helps Press for Urgent Climate Action. And we argue in that we have long since arrived at the point at which civil disobedience by scientists has become justified. I'm going to leave you with this message from Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN. He says, climate activists are sometimes depicted as dangerous radicals, but the truly dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing the production of fossil fuels. He goes on to say, we need disruption to end this destruction. So I invite you to join these movements, help cause the necessary disruption to the status quo and push for the change that we so desperately need. Thanks very much.